boy, hibbity bibbity, here I go again. You know, looking at the title of this episode, I'm already worried.
Today, I'm going to cover a bit of a slippery slope within martial arts, and that's forms. Why?
So, I guess I would say there are three different slippery slopes in martial arts. One of them is what I'm clearly about to talk about here. The other is spinning attacks, and the other is jumping or flying attacks.
Even forms.
Oh
because
boy.
you have people on both ends of that spectrum. You've got people who are like, forms are the best thing since sliced bread, and you should do them forever and always. And you've got people who believe forms are totally useless, just try to change my mind, you will fail. But what is their origin? Why do we even have forms? What's with forms and their whole deal entirely?
So first things first, to spare those who want all the time spared, you should do forms if they work. If they don't, well then you don't necessarily have to bother. But for some people they work, for others they don't. It really just depends on what is due for you or whatever.
And should they be done? I'm going to cover that slippery slope in today's knowledge drop with me, Greg Laurel.
My cat is yelling outside.
Forms. Some people love that word. Some people are like, ugh, not again, whenever they hear forms. I've been on both.
True.
I mean, even just within where I currently train, I've been on both ends of yay forms and ugh forms, because why even do they exist? Sometimes I wonder, and sometimes
The reasons I'm sometimes like ugh forms because sometimes it can be hard to convince yourself to continue doing them if it's like especially for testing purposes. But yeah.
I understand why they exist. Sometimes I don't. And like, I'll just get this out of the way. I think they have their place, and it really depends on what martial art you're doing that decides whether or not forms should even exist. For example,
Yeah, I
Krav
mean,
Maga doesn't have forms. That just doesn't make even any sense as far as Krav Maga goes, because Krav Maga is strictly a combative art.
he's going on about Krav Maga
There are no
again.
forms in Jiu-Jitsu, obviously, because it's a ground-based art.
Oh,
Jiu-Jitsu would just look like you writhing around on the ground in a very controlled manner. And that would look silly, even if you did it perfectly. Even so, in traditional martial arts like, say, karate or wushu or taekwondo, you do have forms. And there are a few reasons for that. Now then, I personally only really know why karate has forms. This may also go to wushu and taekwondo, but I do not know for sure. So, the actual history is that when American forces occupied Japan and Okinawa,
this is only like
Second
for
World
why
War,
the Americans have
they
forms,
started
I
learning
guess.
karate, and they started learning those martial arts from Japan and Okinawa. Now then, I don't know about you, but I personally probably don't like the idea of a occupying army suddenly being like, now teach us your ancient heritage and heritage is not even a word. Teach us your ancient heritage martial art or die. So they didn't really have much of a choice. So what they taught was actually kind of kids karate. The soldiers that were taught kids karate were
No blocks in kata. You know, a block is a strike against somebody's attacking arm or foot.
taught kids karate. So they brought that back to the States. That's why you even have such a concept as blocks separate from strikes. But
Just what
one
I
of my
just said.
cousins-in-law um, does will fiercely say there are no blocks.
Oh, that guy I guess is me then.
Strikes. All blocks are
Yes, my cousin-in-law was the one who did very much drive the point home. No blocks in kata.
strikes. So it just, what are you doing? It's like, what is it for? I mean, this could be considered an upward block against an overhead strike. This can also be considered an upward strike against somebody who's doing an overhead strike, but you're striking right here at their elbow fulcrum and trying to snap their arm. Blocks are strikes, make no mistake. They're strikes. I mean, you could even call them defensive strikes if you so wish. Now then,
whatever gets you to hammer them in, right?
So in the U.S.,
what's in a name?
Karate forms, and there are, and make no mistake, even in traditional karate, and in Hawaiian Kempo, there are still forms. Um,
I'm
Now,
about to
I
lose
bet
my
my
shit at
personal
this guy
opinion is that it's
overpronouncing the word
probably
karate.
the point of them initially was to train the techniques and in a sort of flowing manner that kind of makes sense in a very specific situation. Now then, no one is ever going to do a form in a fight. You might do a thing from a form in a fight. You might do that strike in a fight, but you're not going to do that strike here, and then here in a fight like is in one of the forms that my studio teaches. It's one of the phenons. I can't remember which. They're almost interchangeable as far as which number goes where.
You know, when it comes to Pinon, Shodan, Nidon, Sandan, Godon, Yandon, you know, you know, one studio's Pinon Shodan is another one's Pinon Sandan. You know, it's oh boy. I don't even want to with that. It's a lot to talk about.
Because some places their Pinon Shodan is another place's Pinon Nidon, and it all used to be one form, and it was daunting.
Is it obvious that I don't remember entirely what I said in these episodes?
Even so, but you still got people. I mean, even there's probably going to be people in the comments who are going to say, "Greg, you're wrong. Forms are the best," or "Greg, you're wrong. Forms are the worst." And I'll let you guys go at each other there, and I'm just going to stand on the sidelines and eat popcorn because, frankly, that's going to be hilarious to me watching you guys bicker about it. Even so,
Well, I mean, they won't be bickering about it. They'll be attacking me directly for whichever stance that I've gone against.
But they do have their purpose. They're there to teach you that
how many times is you're gonna say that they have their place?
But you might not. One of my instructors, the guy who taught him some traditional stuff, he would ask. Now my instructor would ask the guy, "Do I do this? Then this?"
Oh, I remember what this is now.
Good, because it would have worked. I mean, like those strikes would have done the job. They would have dealt with your opponent. Is it block, kick, chop, or is it block, chop, kick? Yes, good. That's what he would say. Because you still got it done. You still did the job.
If it worked, it worked.
I mean, even with techniques, as they're sometimes called, with self-defense techniques that might be like block, kick, chop. You might not do that whole technique. You might just block and kick, and the guy's just like, okay, this dude is not worth it. He just kicked me in the solar plexus. I'm gasping for air, so you don't even need to do that chop. I actually thought about writing a character who has an entire plan for this fight. I'm gonna do 18 different moves and it's gonna be great. And then the guy and then his opponent falls unconscious halfway through, and he's like, "Oh man, I wasn't done with him." Grumble, 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 and he just grumbles off and
I sort of have a sequence like that in one of the books that I'm writing.
Make no mistake, you're not gonna fight somebody with a force.
What happens? He jabs the guy once, and then the dude falls over, and he's like, "Oh well, now I'm disappointed."
Those are short one, short two, long one, and long two.
Oh, they're a couple of fighting forms.
They're called fighting forms because they're the closest thing that you're going to get to using a form in a fight, but you're still not going to use that form to fight somebody because short one is all blocks, even though there's no blocks in kata. So I correct myself with the entirety of short one is defensive strikes as far as I know it. It's just bam, bam, then what good. But anyways,
I don't remember it nowadays.
No punches or kicks in short one. So you're still
Not gonna lie, I don't remember the sequence nowadays, but I still remember how to do the individual movements themselves.
You're still probably
even though I don't remember the actual sequences of short one, short two, long one, or long two nowadays.
Defensive strikes. When you're fighting somebody,
looks like I'm moving around a little bit more in this one than last.
No plan really survives first contact with the enemy. You can plan all you want, but it all generally goes to hell as soon as the fighting actually starts. You might be like, all right, I'm going to kick this man in the solar plexus, and then I'm going to punch that man in the face. But then you might end up kicking a guy's leg out and kicking the other guy in the groin. I mean, generally you want to try to avoid having a whole plan because
planning when a strike was going to come is how I got one of my most embarrassing moments in that studio. I basically tensed up way too hard in anticipation of a punch, and then kind of flopped over on one of the bags. and it looked
somebody,
like
a trained
dude hit
fighter
my
getting
off
beat by
switch
an untrained
because he
fighter
punched, and I was like, wait, that was
because
too late. Sunk.
is because that trained fighter is trained to fight other trained fighters, or they're trained to fight against, use this technique against that strike when the other guy's willing to improvise even though he's untrained. You've got, and like, even so, sometimes you see people who would, by all other means, be a black belt get knocked out by this massive haymaker, because usually a lot of people who train to fight are training to fight with other people who are training to fight. So you end up fighting trained fighters. Then when somebody does the untrained strike, you're like, wait a minute, I did not train for this. And then blam. Even though
Do
you
both.
probably order a pizza by the time that fist hits you.
If you've got a bad enough
Like, we're not playing soccer. You're not
curriculum,
gonna
then
wind up
anything's
kicking me
possible.
halfway across the football field. I mean, but even so, why even forms is the main question of this episode.
This hurts
And
me more than it
I
hurts
would
any of you,
say,
remember.
personally, why even forms? Because you, I mean, I almost want to say
Why
because
even
if you're
forms?
bullying me,
Because
you want
for
that
you
next
personally
belt
they
push.
work. Why shouldn't
But
you forms? Because
that's
for you
really
they
not
don't
the whole
personally work.
story.
You know,
I mean,
whichever one it is for you,
make no
do
mistake,
that.
there's
You know
definitely
yourself better
artisan
than anyone
forms I
else.
would never use in a self-defense situation. Um, there are entire sequences, there are even entire just strikes and moves that I would just never use because that would be silly unless a very specific
You might end up
situation.
naturally progressing into that kind of
That was the only
movement.
thing that made sense at the time.
Like how in Pinon Shodan
One of
has
the
a
things you can do
sequence.
alongside forms is a little thing called spontaneous self-defense, where basically somebody comes in with a strike.
Okay, so you know, yeah, certain individual moves or techniques within a form I never want to plan to do, but I might find myself in some position where suddenly, wait a minute, where I suddenly just kind of naturally transition into something that I probably wouldn't have done otherwise. Like this one sequence from Pinon Shodan where there's attackers, and it's an interesting sequence of blocks that I wouldn't ever plan to use, but might naturally be the course of what happens as a result of having to turn around like that and smack a guy in the throat or whatever.
And you just have to defend against it. Whether you defend against it with a technique or you come up with something new, and as long as the job gets done. It's called spontaneous self-defense, and I do recommend it for anybody who's practicing.
It is a great way to drill.
Against a bunch of different strikes.
Use control
You
though
can have a
with your
general
partners.
go-to technique for or set of strikes for a particular attack. By all means, have like a general go-to thing. Like for example, against that straight punch, I would like to deflect that, grab his arm, and then break it, and then smack him. By all means, have that, but do have something else too, just in case that suddenly doesn't
Be ready
work.
to use something
That's why
else.
spontaneous
You know,
self-defense is a
don't go out of your way
addendum.
to do a particular
It's like two
strike that
different
you're
sides of
just
the sword.
dying
It's
to
like
try
two
out.
opposite ends of a coin. Because forms
What?
are a very determined set of strikes and movements that combine together.
I'm trying to avoid having to pause it because then that's more editing stuff for me.
Not all of them. And you've got on the other side of that spontaneous self-defense, where suddenly this guy's hitting you and you gotta do something. And if you don't do something, you're gonna get smacked. And being smacked is just no fun. And then you get embarrassed because like, oh, I should have beaten that guy. And then you end up having nightmares for the next 6 months about the opponent you cannot beat. And I am getting a little too real because that's generally what I have.
You know, that's a bit too specific to be anything short of a confession with the opponent unbeatable nightmare.
Sort of into my nightmares of the opponent unbeatable, as I've called it. Some people like me.
I called it.
I'm not gonna lie. I used to be pretty physically weak. I mean, I was asthma stricken. I was criminally short. Like, you know that average growth chart thing that's like got like a little bunch of lines. And I didn't even register on that until I was in like middle school. And even
that is true.
I'm a little shorter than average, I would say. Like, I'm not quite of average height. But
it is also the case that I just don't know a lot of people, so I don't have a sample size to really draw averages from.
A defined person that no matter where I punch or kick or stab or shoot, no matter what I do, I just can't hurt this guy. And it basically proves to me that I can't defend myself or people I care about. And I have been told before, like, make no
What
mistake,
people you care
if
about? Well, there's
you are
cats and a
physically
dog.
capable
Yeah, no
of
humans, though.
doing whatever
Gods know
you
there's
are
no
will be
humans that I
to a
care
person.
that much about.
There is a video that I did take of me, and where I sidekicked through about an inch and a half of pine, two pine boards stacked on top of each other with no spacer. So
Yeah,
instead
that's
of
true. I
two
still have that
instances
video.
of one pine board, it's one instance of two pine boards, which does make a massive difference, by the way. And for my black
Yeah,
belt sessions, I'm
spacers
going to
are.
have to sidekick through three pine boards stacked on top of each other with no spacer. So it's basically about the
Of
equivalent of
course, that never
breaking through
happened.
three ribs, because like about a 3/4 inch of pine is equivalent to about a rib. And I've broken through two of those before with a sidekick. Despite all that evidence, sometimes I still have those nightmares because
Boards don't hit back.
I do dwell on my
That's
feelings
why.
a bit too much. But that's a little bit personal going into that, I realize now. I do believe that any one person can beat any other person given the right circumstances. For example, a person who is only maybe height tall up to here
Yeah. Any one thing can do any one other thing, given the correct
tall,
things.
because that would actually be not too terrifyingly difficult. Because
I somehow managed to, in this series, seemingly have both strong opinions and no opinions at the same time.
Which actually was the case once. It was kind of amusing because this guy was really tall and he knew how to fight up close, so that was like a nightmare to deal with. Even so,
I actually know what he's talking about, even though I wasn't paying
I do
attention.
believe that any one being placed up against any other being, the two can beat each other. Like, if I put, say,
a tall guy who knows how to fight up close is just, kind of defeats all of the close the cap thing, but in that case, attack from the sides, because Wing Chun's really good at the straightaway. So attack from angles if your opponent's really good at
whether or not she will, that's another
blurred
question
Schnurg.
entirely. But she does possess the physical capability to beat any one other being. It's just whether or not that actually happens. Because there are parts of the body you cannot strengthen, like joints and muscles, like the groin muscle here, and these nerve clusters. I think there's one somewhere around here. Might have had that moved after my surgery, but
I guarantee you that it wouldn't have been removed.
Why even forms to
because a bone graft would not necessitate something like that. I'm not even sure if there is a nerve cluster around there. There might be. I don't remember.
Toughening up the mind is just as important as toughening up the body because, like many people have said, mental health is just as important, if not more so, than
which hip is it?
Because
that's this one. It's my left hip that got a piece taken out of it.
How in all the realms are going to do so physically, but if I can tie this all right back up together to why even forms can give you, like, if you are capable of doing that form to a T, it might actually give you a bit of a confidence boost, and it might give you the know-how that you are physically capable of defending yourself if you need to, as long as you are.
The only truly reliable way to figure that out is to try.
Spontaneous self-defense that I talked about earlier, where you just defend against that strike all of a sudden. Like, you don't plan that, because having a plan is among.
Although, admittedly,
if that plan doesn't go,
at that place, sometimes it was just me like, all right, we're gonna do spontaneous self-defense against a right straight through punch, right step through punch, and I admit I was sometimes guilty of. I want to try to incorporate this strike in, and there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, because training space is the place to be doing that sort of experimental.
Do what I wanted to do, and it would probably distract him for a bit. He'd probably be like, what are you talking about? And just kick him or something. I don't recommend trying that.
Why not roll a bluff check against a bad guy?
Forms.
Why not try to roll intimidate by beginning to disrobe very enthusiastically when someone threatens your life?
You're doing so well that it impresses all the people and all the judges if you're at a tournament or something. Then it probably can give you like a confidence boost, but
I don't think I've ever had my hair this long before.
Necessarily combat, and combat isn't necessarily forms. I mean, it kind of goes back into all is one.
Oh my god.
I'm not doing philosophy until next month, I think. But even so,
you're too late for that one.
you've got forms, and usually you're just gonna have to live with that. Whether or not you personally believe in them, forms are going to exist now until the end of martial arts, which is pretty much not gonna happen. As long as there are people, there will be martial arts. Whether or not those martial arts are effective will be determined by those people.
Whether or not they're going to be called martial arts,
And
even. You know, as long as there's two people on the
when it
planet,
comes
someone's going to want
to
someone else killed.
all these concepts and such, and you really gotta take it as it comes. It's very much a matter of this is what it is right now, and you're gonna have to deal with that. I mean, but I digress. Why even forms? Like, I mean, I'd say that I've concluded at the very least that forms can give you a little confidence boost if you do them correctly. Um, they can they can teach you that little thing right there. It might even teach you that you never want to use this particular strike at all because you don't really like it, and you'd rather know that you don't want to do that than not know that you wouldn't want to do that, and then suddenly do that, and suddenly it doesn't work. It might teach you what not to do even in a street situation because you didn't like how that technique goes, and you're like, I'm just never going to use that. So that way, you just nix that out of your combat repertoire, as it were. And even so, even with the people who would say that forms are just the best thing since sliced bread, even with the people that would say that forms are absolutely useless and have no place in a good martial art, I mean, there's points on both ends of that spectrum. I mean, forms are always going to exist. There's no two ways about it. What
So
martial art
far,
you do
in both episodes, I
determines
haven't
what forms
exactly
you do
reached
and whether or not you even do them. Because if you do
a
some
great
teachings
massive
that people talk
conclusion.
about, you're not going to do forms because forms don't exist in either of those arts. But if you do something like karate or taekwondo or wushu, or I mean, even eskrima has like a form that's called solo form, and it's very
At least
it's very much
the one that
and
for the
eskrima
type
solo
of
form is very much
Eskrima
just
I was ever
throwing
doing that.
basic strikes and parries just to knock that
And you know, I wouldn't even necessarily know if it would
sometimes
be
quite
considered a
hard
form
I've learned when it comes to
proper
personal
by
because
other
getting
traditional
knocked
martial
off
arts,
would be
just because of the
normal.
way that solo
But make
form
sure it
was
stays there because if
constructed.
you're knocked out of your head, it's no use to you then. But I digress. Forms are going to be there, and unless you're in a martial art that really does not do forms. I mean, and even as martial arts are defined as a military art, militaries will not teach you to do forms. They'll teach you how to fight because that's what the purpose of a military is. It's to fight, whether in defense or offense. The purpose is to fight, make no mistake. So you have stuff like
Well, that's
the
kind of
Marine Corps martial arts. Think
obvious,
about
isn't
it.
it?
They're not going to teach you forms. Why ever would they? You're not going to fight with a form. Systema does not use forms because it's not
Ooh,
what it's for.
ooh,
It's not
yikes.
for
Okay,
forms. It's for
okay,
fighting.
dude.
Even
Oh,
though
jeez. Oh,
a
that was
martial
a
art is for fighting,
that word
there
physically
might be
just hurt me
forms
right
because
there.
it hasn't been
You
used
know, once again,
as
it's for the same
the dominant
reason
fighting
that
art.
like
I'd be willing to
certain
bet
martial arts just
that
have
in the
nasty
old days
reputations.
of
It's because of the
K and um, even
I
even in the old days of wushu, like when it was first getting formed up, I bet there were not a lot of forms because it was being used to fight, and you don't fight with forms. So it might be that
the form was,
globalization
and
we
what
mentioned
forms did exist probably
previously,
were
that it might be
supposed to
just
just remind
there's a universal
practitioners what
sort
strikes
of
exist and how to
recognition
move your body
standard
like that.
that says this guy knows what he's doing, and that might be forms. So one could even argue that forms really are just for show. Forms may just be for sport, but they
I
will
just cut right there.
because
It means
the
he's
only
finally
time you're ever
wrapping
going
up.
to do a full form in front of other people for the purpose of doing that form is probably in a tournament before judges.
It had
You're
better
not going to
be
fight
only
with
for
form.
that
I've said that
purpose.
so many times, and I'm going to say it again. I'm going to say it one more time to knock into your head. You're not going
Don't.
to fight with a form.
Okay, we get
But
it.
you're still going to learn it probably, especially if you're doing one of those traditional martial arts. Even
Yeah,
historical European
it all
martial
depends
arts
on what you want.
really doesn't have forms because it was a
You might make
art
yourself a
method.
form
And
in one of these non-form places if that's what helps
in
you
the early days
remember
of
how to do
wushu,
things.
they're actually forms were really just compilations of knowledge. Just like this is what I know and what I've learned. I'm not this is not something that would be used in a fight in its specific circumstance, but this is just kind of a compilation of knowledge. So, I mean, I guess you could call a form a compilation of knowledge because that you show to other people that you might incorporate into your own system because it's a compilation of knowledge. It's basically a sort of kind of TLDR version of all of your techniques and such because you might have a technique that goes block, kick, chop, but your form might contain kick.
What more can I really say that hasn't already been said here? Yeah, and in the age of communication, in the age of the internet, you might not need necessarily those forms as much because the knowledge isn't exactly in a whole lot of danger of being lost. You might do those forms because otherwise you might forget that those are strikes you can do, and that those are blocks you can do, and that those are parries and that you can do, and what have you. But in this day and age, you can just look up basics and advanced stuff, and you can even find out where the reliable sources of information are through the internet. And, you know, yeah, you don't need a whole lot of help remembering because the memory of computers will do it for you and remind you as needed, as you call upon that. So, you know, as always, with the grains of salt, but also knowing that this guy was willing to put stuff out there. He was willing to say things. He was willing to do things.